All right, everyone, welcome to another episode of the Because Football podcast. This is your host, Coach Andrew, and today we have our guest, is Jessica Malone. Jessica, thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, happy to be here.
Awesome. So, ever since I saw your Instagram handle, Soccer Sabbatical, I was like, wow, is it possible for sabbatical to last your entire life? Because I think that's what I would like to have. So first of all, major props on that move, and very jealous. But just kind of give us the short and sweet, kind of where you're from and where you are today.
Sure. So I'm currently sitting in South Philadelphia, about a mile north of Citizens Bank Park, where I live now. But I'm from Franklin County, Pennsylvania originally. So I grew up playing, local youth soccer there. But I became a huge fan of the sport of soccer, of watching it during the 1998 World Cup on TV in the summertime, was just completely enamored, just like the right age, nothing to do in the summer, just sitting around, not, the internet wasn't really a thing yet. And I just
Right.
was transported out of South Central Pennsylvania into France in my brain and learned so much about the world through that tournament. And on the back of that, with the 1999 Women's World Cup, which I was fortunate enough to attend some games in DC,
Awesome.
I was like perfect age, for that 99er mentality to really like sink its teeth into me. And so I've been following the sport for 25 years now. Obviously, what that looks like has changed a lot over that time, and I'm sure we'll get into that. But in the last 10 years, I've started traveling to attend games, national team games, club team games. It started with traveling to watch U.S. men's national team World Cup qualifiers around 2013. And then in 2017, I really started traveling to England and Germany to watch some of the club teams that, the younger U.S. men's team players were playing on, and really sort of picked up the hobby of what's called ground hopping, which is trying to get to as many stadiums to see games as possible. I didn't even know it was a thing. I do now. There's an app where you can track it all, so I know.
I've seen that.
I know my stats.
So what's your stat as of today, as August 23rd, 2023?
I think I've been to New Zealand, where I just was for the World Cup, was my 19th country that I've seen a game.
Okay, fantastic.
And I got to my 90th stadium while I was there.
Okay, awesome. So we're getting close to the 100 level.
Yeah, I'm not in a rush. I'm sort of savoring it. Yeah. I work full time, so it's not as easy as it was during certain periods of my life. But that's sort of, through doing that, I've really gotten to observe what these clubs mean in their communities, who's in the stadium, how the clubs interact with the communities, and it's just this really fascinating, like, social observation of the game and all the narratives around it. And so I've sort of I'm a neutral. I don't have a favorite club team, so I don't have any skin in the game. Like, I'm literally just observing and sort of trolling everyone equally. Right. But I've seen so many fascinating things and had so many fascinating things happen to me during this, which is, sort of a hobby, or I guess you could call it a passion project. Really, it's just a fun way to spend disposable income. I'm being completely honest, but it's what I love to do. Almost all of my travel now is planned around trying to get to a game somewhere. And that's just sort of my highest priority and what makes me happy. So I'm really fortunate to be able to do that. And I just got back from the World Cup in New Zealand. So recently off of a 16-day trip with the sole purpose of going to games.
Awesome. So there's so many places I'd like to go. Obviously, like, for me, the 1999 World Cup was also like super formative. For 98, I don't remember watching it at all. I remember like being at a pool, and it's like one of those weird childhood memories. And I just remember like hearing that France won.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh yeah. And I played a little soccer at the time. I was like, okay, I heard France. And then as a boy in like 1999, like the men's team kind of suck, right? Like we're good in CONCACAF, but we're like as an American growing up, you expect to be the best, right? So it's like, oh, the women are the best. The women are the best in the world. Like, that's who we're going to be following. That's who I'm going to be watching. And so many of those games and those players, like, Mia and Brandi Chastain and Christine Lilly and Julie Foudy and Michelle Akers, like, and then Brianna Scurry, like, so many of those players were really formative to me. And that was like kind of the first World Cup where I feel like I watched a lot and really connected with. And I feel like that arguably had a bigger impact than even like the 94 World Cup that the US hosted. Like, what do you think kind of made that moment such a big kind of a pivotal moment in like American soccer in general?
Yeah, I was a bit too young for 1994. My memory of the final
Same.
is sort of
Yeah.
like yours. It's a little fuzzy, although fortunately, we knew a family that were huge soccer fans, and someone pulled me into the living room to watch the penalty shootout. So I do remember watching that, but I have no other memories of the tournament. Didn't go to any games. Um, I think like MLS had formed by the time the 99
Yes. Yeah.
Women's World Cup was happening. Like I had been to DC United games before that
Hmm.
Women's World Cup happened. So I think, people were sort of starting to go to games at stadiums in the US
Right.
already. Obviously, there was a huge crowd draw. And if you've read any of the books or watched any of the documentaries or lived through the 99 World Cup, you remember that players were literally like handing out tickets to fans in the months leading up to it. Like the players themselves were doing a ton of PR around this. They really just like swung for the fences from a marketing perspective, and it worked. I mean, I remember like seeing an ad probably in the Washington Post about how to get tickets and
Hmm.
calling to
Yeah.
get tickets and going to two double headers at God, I can't even remember what stadium it was, Jack Kent Cook at the time, maybe somewhere in Maryland. Um, and I one of the games that I went to was the US quarterfinal against Germany. So it was a double
Okay.
header. It was US against Germany first, and then Brazil, Nigeria, back
So
to back, which is insane if you think
wild.
about it now.
Wild. Too
And
much dopamine.
in that US game, well, everyone knows Brandi Chastain for obviously the penalty that won that World Cup, but she
Yeah.
scored an own goal against Germany and she passed
Hmm.
the ball into our net like 5 minutes into that Germany game. And I thought I was going to die. It was my first sports related like crisis moment of anxiety that I really felt in my life. And I was like, I don't ever want to feel this again. This is terrible.
But at the
And of
same
course,
time, it's a hook though, right? Because it
yeah. And
has
of course,
such a
they came back and won
an
that
effect.
game. And so I think if you had started watching at that point, maybe as a casual fan, you already get just the way the games were going, the narrative, all of it.
Yeah.
And I think, with the US and with everything with Title IX and college soccer here and the way how much further along we've been able to get with women playing the sport, I think we were just ready as a nation to embrace the tournament.
Hmm.
It wasn't perfect. Obviously, there were still like stupid things being said to the players and weird promotional stuff that they were doing just because it was like women and it was the 90s. But it clearly, they were able to launch a professional league off the back of that. But the success sort of didn't necessarily sustain in a marketable way or a commercially successful way.
Right.
And my
Right.
fandom too of the women's game dropped off after that. I kept following the men's game closely, but there just wasn't access to the women's side of the sport in the same way that there was with the men's at that time.
Yeah. Yeah. As far as like the media coverage, I remember
Mhm.
to your point of like the marketing push for the 99 World Cup, some of those like commercials, whether it was for the World Cup itself, or I think it was like, a lot of the Nike commercial stuff are like still ingrained. Like
Yeah,
just they crush it from that angle of
oh, I
just
know.
building a story, building like picking and making their heroes, whether it was for, I still remember like the one with like Soon Wen, the Chinese player,
Mhm.
right? Like she was like a top player in the world at the time.
Yeah,
And like that ad and just for different, and I think that was a big part. But then to your point, getting the women's league started up, there just wasn't the same like media coverage. And to be fair, at the time, it's not like the MLS was getting a
right.
ton, but obviously more resources, more support. And so it's been on the women's side this process of like starting and riding that momentum, dropping off, because
Hmm.
soccer's as for still most of the history in the U.S. of professional sports, soccer's still been a pretty tough sell, and has to be kind of gimmicky and things like that, or maybe there's one moment that was tough to sustain it. I think it's like trying to get deeper into that cultural level. Like
Yeah,
everybody can get with the spectacle of a major tournament, of a world championship, and be
right.
like swept up in that.
The
But it's
Olympics,
like,
any
yep,
sport,
how do we like get it into that like
yeah,
cultural level where it's, and like it seems like it grabbed you because now years later, like it's something that you don't necessarily even have a team to like live and die with, or a club
right.
team at least. But that's something I think about a lot. So what do you think is like a difference from a cultural standpoint, and speaking to a little bit like you mentioned what clubs mean in their communities from the cultural aspects in the US, or let's say at least mainstream in the United States, because as we know,
Mhm.
such a diverse country, there like soccer is so important to other communities, but just not on a mainstream level. Like that versus like what it would be in a in a Spain and England and
Mhm.
Argentina. Like what's on a cultural level, like how is it different?
So I'm fortunate enough that I've been to games in these places, so I can sort of compare like what I see in the stadiums. But there's a caveat to that, which is that in most cases I've only been to one game of a
Okay.
team at a team's home stadium. So maybe it's not representative of what happens there all the time. Um, the U.S. like at your average MLS game, there's a pretty high percentage of women compared to what I see across the globe
Hmm.
or what I've seen. I hadn't really like thought of that much or paid it much mind until I started traveling. Um, because it's pretty like it's a pretty low percentage in England. Specifically, that's one of the lowest percentages
Okay.
of women, or I should say of just people who don't identify as men, in the crowd. Spain, there are more women. Germany, the Netherlands, more women. Argentina, Brazil is probably the highest percentage of women that I've seen at a stadium outside of the US.
Okay.
I went to a Flamengo game at the Maracanã and I was like, there's 50% women here. This is amazing. Like, I feel safe.
Sure.
It's just a totally different, you feel it. Um,
Hmm.
so it's really fascinating. And there are a lot of reasons why someone who loves a team might not want to go to a stadium and might not feel comfortable or like they belong there or feel safe there, which is a whole other thing. But here in the US, we definitely have like anyone will go to a sporting event. There's no sort of
Right.
stigma against women. There's nothing like, oh, this is for the men only, or it's the guys' day
Hmm.
out. Women will go watch whatever sporting event with men or without them. And obviously, soccer tends to bring a lot of families, so you get um,
Absolutely.
a lot more gender diversity just because of that. But it's probably been that way since the beginning. I don't remember what I was seeing in those early MLS crowds, but um, I think there's a pretty good mix in the US, for whatever reason that may be. And in my experience, a lot of countries still have a way to go, but there's a lot of gatekeeping going on to keep
Mm.
their stadium diversity at bay, which is unfortunate. And that's not like policies that the club is putting out necessarily, although there can be stuff like there aren't very many women's bathrooms, or there are no gender neutral bathrooms, or you know, that's one of the big ones, or you just don't, the way the stadium is set up, you just don't feel that safe there, or like where the supporter section is. Outside of the US, everywhere that I've been, the away support is in their own section. There are no
Sure.
fans of opposing teams sitting next to
Right.
each other. And actually, in Buenos Aires, for the top five teams, they don't even let away fans in the stadium
Yeah.
because there have
Yeah.
been some incidents in the past. So there's no one from the opposite team there on game day. Um, so it's interesting. I spend a lot of time observing crowds and thinking about who's not there that probably loves a team and wishes they could be there, and maybe it's economic reasons that they can't be there, but I get the feeling that it's a lot of other things, just because of who is there. It's a very homogenous
Hmm.
crowd.
And yeah, and unfortunately, one of the things with like the game that brings out so much passion in us at the end of
Mhm.
the day, it is kind of almost like a proxy, for
Yeah,
battle and for like warfare, and so it creates all this us and them and these tribal feelings. And to your point of what the clubs mean in the communities, like I think one part of the United States where it's a little bit different, like you might get at Eagles games where people are a little bit more on edge, but like in
yeah,
the US, it's generally a franchise where
right.
they're like, hey, we're gonna come in, we made this league,
Yeah,
we're coming in, we're gonna put this team here. Whereas like in most parts of the world, these clubs have grown organically from a few streets in a neighborhood to the
right.
neighborhood itself. Looking, talking about like, Liverpool and Everton, for example. Imagine
Hmm.
having two like major teams a
Right.
park's distance away from each other, right?
Yeah.
And so
Oh,
I
there
think,
are
and
two
that's
teams
been a lot
across the
of it.
street from each other in Buenos Aires.
Really,
Two rival
they
stadiums across the
be
street from
they
each
be
other.
even closer,
Yeah.
even closer. So it just depends, not even what side of the park, but what side of the street
Yeah.
you're on. So, but again, it creates those kind of like it can create the us versus them, which is not always the best environment. I know there have been general some policies and things after incidents and atrocities and things of trying to
Mhm.
change that. But that's something I didn't really think about in the US. Maybe it's just a bit more family friendly. It's trying to be marketed that way, and
Yeah,
is
I
just
think
kind of
there was
more
an
open.
aggressive push for that early because people thought like that's where the money is going to come from, and so now you see MLS clubs sort of try. They're like, how do we win over the millennials without cars and get them,
Yeah,
and like we need to build all these stadiums downtown because no one wants to drive to them anymore, and so they're trying to figure it out. Um, but yeah, it's going to games in the U.S. is great, but you don't get the same necessary like I guess I don't want to say that US fans aren't passionate, but it's just a different feel when you're in stadiums in
hmm
other countries. And there are a lot of reasons for that. And teams here do try to replicate what they see in other countries, and some of it
sure.
is growing organically, which is great, but it's just
Yep,
they're decades behind. I mean, the league MLS started in the late 90s or the mid 90s. So it's going to take decades for this stuff to for you what is
absolutely.
US soccer fan culture in stadium, what should the experience be like to sort of solidify.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and again, to that point of deeper cultural things, trying to it takes the time, right? So of course, throughout your travels, it's been a lot of like club games on the
Mhm.
men's side. With at this point, I guess has it been how many women's World Cups? Because I know the U.S. one. I know you went to the France one. Obviously, the most recent
Yep.
Australia, New Zealand.
So I've been to 3 women's World Cups, and then I went to
Okay,
Russia in 2018 for the men's.
okay.
But I only started my Instagram account in 2019, so everything pre 2019 is already
Gotcha. You just
there.
got to go through the archives,
Yeah,
dig through the files.
dig through the old content.
What's is there a different or what is the difference between like maybe a general feeling when you go to a club match
Yeah.
versus like a national match? Obviously, the World Cup itself is something special, but you've been to a lot of friendlies and qualifiers
Mhm.
for the national teams as well. Like, what would you say is kind of a difference? The country versus club atmosphere.
Yeah, I guess I'm trying to think of who I've seen, what national teams I've seen play at home. I guess France in 2019 during the World Cup, New Zealand during the recent World Cup, and then the US men's and women's during, tournaments or qualifiers. So like when you go to a US men's national team World Cup qualifier, there's a air of desperation because we need points, we need to win the game.
Yeah.
Everyone's nervous. There are real consequences if you don't get the job done, especially at home, where sort of the general logic of the whole CONCACAF World Cup qualifying cycle is win at home, tie on the road, and you're good. So when you can't do that, or when you go down a goal, it really gets pretty quiet. I was at
Mm,
the first game of the most recent men's qualifying cycle when we played Canada in Nashville, and I just remember like Canada scored and it was so quiet, and like the crowd seemed very bored. They were playing in the NFL stadium, and the camera operator just started showing a guy chugging a beer on screen during the game, and everyone started cheering, and I was like, what is this? This is terrible. And I'm
it's
not
almost
blaming the fan, like I'm not
yeah.
throwing the fans under the bus there. I wasn't making a ton of noise. I don't make a ton of noise at games, like I'm an observer. Um, and I'm not there to like scream my head off at people or the ref or whatever. Um, but it's pretty interesting. Whereas clubs, they have, they've got their songs, they've got their chants, they've got
Yeah.
the players that they are, and everyone knows the club so intimately that they know if they're playing well, they know if they're playing poorly.
hmm
They see them week in, week out, maybe they're season ticket holders. They spend a lot of money on merchandise, they spend a lot of money on tickets. Um, so you really get there's just more background noise. There's more ambient noise at
Right.
a game.
Right. Interesting. And does that change obviously with the World Cup just being a massive spectacle in itself? Like even in a country, for example, like you were in New Zealand,
Mhm.
that's a rugby country,
Yeah,
right? Like predominantly, right? They love the All
yeah,
Blacks there. So do you feel like a shift? Were you speaking to local like Kiwis and say, hey, like everybody's
yeah.
kind of
So
swept up in that,
I was at the opening match against Norway at Eden Park, and it was made. I mean, it's one of my favorite games that I've ever been to because New Zealand got their first ever victory at a
yeah,
World Cup, and it was a home match, the opener. It was incredible. But it was pretty funny watching the crowd and like listening to them because, like you said, they're sort of a rugby crowd.
hmm
Um, and there were definitely people in the crowd that knew the game well and knew what was going on, but it was like kind of quiet for a while, and like more quiet than, a sporting event in America where, people tend to just want to go have a good time, drink a ton of beers, whatever. Like that's not outside of the US, that's not what my experience at soccer games have been. People are there to watch the game. They're like,
Okay.
it's 90 minutes. Like we're all just here to sit in our seats and actually
Yeah.
watch the game. We're not going to spend our time in line for nachos and beers.
Yep. Crab
But they,
fries, tough to
yeah.
turn down though.
But they, at one point on a Norway corner kick, someone started chanting like defense, doing a defense chant, like US or American football or basketball. It was
Yeah.
pretty cute. But they picked it up pretty quickly and they were cheering their hearts out at like every tackle, every ball that went out of bounds against Norway. You could feel the country or that crowd at least sort of falling in love with it. And as it gets to halftime and it's 0-0, you could tell people were like, okay, we can win this, and really,
Hmm.
really getting behind the team. And it was just incredible to be there.
Yeah, and that's like such a pivotal moment for for
Yeah.
women's football, especially, but football in general in New Zealand. Of like, okay,
Hmm.
it's our first, we're hosts, right? We're the
Yeah,
hosts,
they
and
did well.
we're playing a tough team, and we've
They got a win and a
got to
draw.
get a result. Yeah,
That's pretty good.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Um, I had let's see. So speaking of now, that was your third World Cup, and we're you know 24 years on from
Mhm.
1999, and obviously the big story from an American perspective for the most recent World Cup is the women's team pretty much underperforming, right? Never
Yeah.
seeming to fully get going. There could be so many reasons for that, and I don't necessarily want to spend a lot of time on that,
Hmm.
because I think the clear thing is that like as has we've been sensing, and now maybe it's just a more obvious and definitive example is like the rest of the world has been catching up on the
Yeah.
women's side of the game. Um, is that something that you've kind of noticed and like obviously like had your finger on the temperature of it, and what do you think is kind of how is maybe even just 2023 changed from like
Hmm.
2019, the level of play and everything like
Yeah, I definitely thought this shift was coming in 2019. And it obviously, maybe in some ways it did, but overall it didn't. I think statistically, actually, even though everyone else got better, the US got like more better. So, we were still advancing, and doing even more so than everyone else. When they expanded the tournament to 32 teams going into 2023, I had no idea what to expect. And I, even going
that?
into this
Hmm.
tournament, was telling people like, there might be more 13 nothings. Like, I don't know what's gonna happen.
Yeah.
Like, get ready.
Yep.
And I was telling people like, I hope I am wrong. I hope I am so wrong. And I was. And I've never been happier in my life to be wrong. I learned a long time ago to not tie my personal happiness to the success of US national teams, which is great for me. I saw a lot of people not having a good time. I was at all three of
Mm.
the US group stage games and people were going through it. There were sort of two groups of people. There's people who obviously were willing to travel to New Zealand, so they're passionate about the team, but maybe hadn't been
Sure.
closely following for the past couple of years. And then there were the people who were very online, and had been sort of in the know about what was going on and were not really surprised by anything that happened. So it was fascinating to be at the US games and watching those two groups of people interact. As some are like, yeah, like obviously this is what's happening, and other people being
Mm.
indignant and being like, I have tickets to the final in Sydney, how could they do this to me? And it's like, well, maybe other teams are just getting better.
Yeah.
And like you said, there's a lot of things like, sure, we underperformed. There are some interviews coming out now, sort of shedding a bit of light on how the players felt in the World Cup and throughout the past couple cycles. And so, I view it, and I have for a long time, as a good thing that we're losing our dominance. I actually think it's great. And this is someone who was like, I'm American. I have like, this is a picture of DeMarcus Beasley. I'm a US national team fan, but not at the expense of like wanting other teams to not get better. Um,
Sure.
and it's so different in the women's game, where it's like a rising tide lifts all boats, and you just want everyone, like, I just want
Hmm.
everyone to
Hmm.
get paid. I want them to get the bonuses they're supposed to be getting. I want them to get all the sponsorship deals. I want, like, no offense, but like Alex Morgan doesn't need more money. Like, I want those deals to be going to other people.
Sure.
So
Yeah.
there's
Yeah.
other people who need
Yeah.
them, and we're starting to get there, thankfully. Um, so it's, I mean, I was cheering with the Vietnamese when they saved that penalty against us, because that crowd was like half Vietnamese people. It was amazing. But I was in my Sophia
And
Smith U.S. national team jersey. It's just like,
yeah,
you have to decide what you want out of this sport and what you want for women. And the U.S. national team winning a third World Cup in a row is not great for women.
yeah, yeah.
It's great for
No.
American
And I
women,
think,
sure, but
yeah,
it's not like it. There's so much more to be gained by us getting knocked out in the round of 16 than
I agree. I think it
going
causes
to the
us to
Fed.
be more self-reflective too
Yeah,
on the US side, and hopefully positive things come from that,
yeah,
and there
I
are
think they
many
will.
countries that have underperformed, and then they kind of went back to the drawing room. But
Yeah,
I agree with your point of like just being as a fan of the game, like knowing the potential there is in the women's game, and even looking at the teams that were performing, Jamaica having like a GoFundMe, right?
yeah,
Spain even being champions, leaving, what was it, like 12 of their players at least at home because of everything going in within their own coaching staff
yeah.
and federation. And then we see at the um, like awarding of the trophy, even seeing like there's so
There's
much room to
still
go. And you
stuff
were
coming
saying
out from that.
gatekeeping and even more so, but I can see your point of like, and I'm sitting here like I, lived in Thailand for 2 years, and just the fact
Mhm.
that they had gotten to two World Cups was amazing. When
It is
like
amazing.
if you're a young girl in Thailand, like you can't find an all girls team till you're like 13, 14.
Yeah,
And then there's very few options, and like maybe you get picked for like your province or your state's school, and you play with those girls, but then you have to travel like to all these other states. Like there's
right.
no infrastructure, right? And it's got to be very similar in Vietnam and in other places. And so hopefully with the success of various countries, or even like Vietnam, a 3-1 against the US is massive,
Yeah,
right? And frustrating the US to that level, and performing that way. And so hopefully it's like now the federations are seeing like, okay, there is so much potential for the game to grow from a performance level, but also like from a fan and cultural level too. And I think that is, must be happening in some places, but then in others we see it's still not.
yeah, and what FIFA may say is happening. The FIFA, like a couple of weeks ago, they said, "Oh, we're going to give the money directly to the federations to give to the players to pay the bonuses or whatever." And you just like, I mean, the Jamaican players haven't been paid in forever. There's no
Mhm.
one holding people accountable for following through on this stuff, and that happens on the men's side too. You hear these
Yep.
stories at the
Yep.
men's World Cup as well. It's just a lot more prevalent in the women's game, and I to be honest, like I said, I sort of dropped off from following the women's game for a while. So I hadn't been to an NWSL game or a women's club pro game in the US until like 2019. So I'm still a pretty recent fan. There are people who have been reporting on this and paying money out of their own pockets to
Mhm.
follow and do, like, there's been so much hard work done by so many people to get things to where they are today, to where these stories are getting reported and where they're coming out by people who just have contacts in the game they've had forever. There was so much content around this Women's World Cup. I couldn't
Yeah.
even keep. I was like, I'm at the World Cup. I don't have time for these podcasts and like these videos. I don't have the time. But I think last week going into the final, I've never been more exhausted as a fan of the women's game. It was such a brutal week. I think with most people have had really mixed feelings about the Spanish team advancing. I'm not going to get into
Mhm.
the details. There have been, I mean, every outlet has been covering
Yep.
at least the summary of that story before the events that happened on Sunday. Um, and then there was like a poll in England said that people didn't think there should be a public holiday if the Lionesses won the World Cup.
Mhm.
And outlets paying these idiots to write op-eds about why it won't mean as much for the women in England to win the World Cup as it would for when the men did in '66. And then Kensington Palace reported that no one from the royal family was going,
Yeah, like
which
one of the
I
Prince, I'm
don't
going to
I
say the
don't
wrong name, the
care
head of
for.
FA,
I
right?
don't care for the
Wasn't even
Royals,
there.
but Prince William is
Yeah.
literally the president of the FA. This would be the equivalent of
Yeah.
Cindy Cohn not being at a World Cup final that the
Yeah.
US is playing in. And then he released some ghastly video with only his daughter sitting next to it. Like, you have two sons. Like, he's choosing to send a message that, like, this is not for men and boys.
Hmm.
that, so like all of that is happening. And then Gianni Infantino gives his speech
Yeah.
about women just not knocking on the right doors. And that we just have to convince men to help us. And
Yeah.
the background of all of that, all of the Manchester United nonsense with Mason Greenwood is happening. And they're like,
Yeah.
we're waiting for the Manchester United women's players to get back from the World Cup to ask them what they want us to do. It was a terrible week to be a women's soccer fan. It was so, I just wanted to like throw my phone out the window and just lay in bed. And I was like, we're approaching the pinnacle event
Yeah. It
of
should be
the
a time of
sport.
like joy and
I'm
celebration.
so
Yeah.
tired of all of this. And I can't even be like that excited for the final because Mapi Leon from Barcelona is one of my favorite players and she's not playing in this final. Like this is all
Mhm.
insane. It is just so, and this is what it, honestly, this is what it's like being a fan of the women's game. It's just uphill constantly. There's never even ground. There's definitely never downhill. It's just uphill
Mhm.
constantly. And that's just as a fan. Like I can't imagine what it's like to be a player or a coach or someone who's, trying to start a team or trying to help a team out. I mean, the amount of crowdfunding that goes
Yeah.
on the women's side of the game is just insane. And like I said, journalists who've spent so much of their money following these teams around just to do like the basic duty of care
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
reporting for the sport, which now a lot of them, they're not getting paid by the major outlets. A lot of them have gone to like the Athletic or they've started their own sort of websites and their own income streams. So it's been a fascinating evolution, but it was for how great the group stage was at the World Cup. It was a really tough final week of it, just with all of that going on.
Yeah. Um, yeah. I don't think I have anything super intelligent to add. Honestly, I agree. It's like in a time that should be of celebration of joy, just like all of like, hey, fantastic athletes playing at such a high level.
Yeah.
And I think like as we're speaking about the game has been improving so much, like the quality of the matches,
Mm-hmm.
like the speed of play, the tempo, just unbelievable.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I think again, maybe it's like we're saying it's a deeper cultural thing, obviously. But you would think even at the higher levels where it's like, I feel like with this performance, like we are proven, right? Like, aren't we knocking it? Like, aren't we doing this? Aren't we
Right.
like doing the best we can to advocate like for ourselves? And so it's very frustrating
Yeah.
to
Certainly
see
the play that was happening on the field was incredible. And I think a lot
yeah.
of people agree with that. And, a lot of people's eyes have been opened. I was at the Euros last summer in England and, there was a marked change in attitude toward the women's game than what I'd experienced during my previous time there. And that was everything from like women my age taking their dads to games and just listening to the
Hmm.
dads be like, oh my God, these women are really great. Or, men on the train talking about like, oh, France is based in this random team in the Midlands. And like, we've been to every France game just because we're, so it was really like, really picking up steam. But there's for a country that the US like holds in such high esteem for this sport, they have some really backwards attitudes. And not obviously, I'm using a very wide brush to paint them with here, but there's so much work to be done there. And there are
At the
people that
yeah.
are trying really hard to get it, but
Yeah.
it's just so ingrained that it's a men's sport there. They banned women from playing the game for 50
Yeah.
years.
I saw you. I didn't even know that. I didn't even. Could you
Well, so
share
there you
that?
go. So they've hit it
Yeah.
well, obviously.
Yeah.
And they're like, yeah, we love our lionesses. It's like from 1921 to 1971, women could not play soccer in England because it got too popular, and it was more popular than the men's after World War One. So here we
Wow.
are.
Wow.
Someone asked
Yeah.
me the other day, they're like, has England ever won a women's World Cup? And I was like, oh, they're 5 decades behind where they
Yeah,
should be.
yeah, and despite that, to pull off the Euros
Yeah,
and then make the World Cup
yeah,
final,
it's incredible.
yeah. So we'll pivot a little bit here. We'll go a little bit close to home. Talk
Mhm.
about kind of like the PA and Philly soccer scene, and I was going to bring up, with back in the day is the Philadelphia Charge. So it sounds like you didn't quite make it to a
I
Charge
didn't
game back in
know.
the day.
Did not.
So Yep. So I remember going to those games. I mean, being fortunate, they played at Villanova University
Mhm.
Stadium and being pretty local to there. I remember going to, and then speaking of like English players made an impact, like Kelly Smith,
Yeah.
total baller and try like the face of the franchise. And but then that league had its time. At the time, the
Mhm.
coach was Mark Krikorian, who's now at Florida State, and they're
Yeah,
crushing it.
they
And
are.
then one of the top like NCAA programs right now. And then we had I think like the Philadelphia Independents, and it's just kind of been stop and start now. But now done NWSL. I mean, we've got like New York, obviously, as a
Mhm.
franchise,
You
and I
see.
know there's been a bit of a push for Philadelphia as well now
Yep.
to kind of get that. With MLS, kind of they're saying they're hinting about capacity with their franchise and things like. Where do you think like NWSL is in their kind of growth stage?
They're
Maybe the
definitely
World Cup
expand. I
doesn't
mean,
super help, but like at this
they've
point,
been expanding, that's for sure. And that's a great sign for the league. If you look at it's apples and oranges, but if you look at a league like the WNBA, which has not expanded and is 25 years old, and is really, they keep saying they're going to do it, but they haven't done it. The growth in the NWSL is really good, and I think there's people are doing it in good faith, and you're getting like a great diversity of where the money's coming from and who's investing. Obviously, Angel City is a crazy example of how that can
mm-hmm.
happen, but all the time it feels like you hear about another athlete investing in a women's team or a joint, men's women's team ownership group, which I think is really great for the sport. I love the NBA, so I'm super pumped anytime an NBA player gets involved in the
Yep.
NWSL. I love it. Unfortunately, I think a lot of the Philadelphia area folks who do sports ownership groups and things like that, they're already tied up in other NWSL teams, which, I can't complain about that. But when you think about who could bring a team here, there's, some conflicts that would have to be, or some divesting that would have to go on, to get, the normal people you would think of who would put the money down, to be able to actually do it from a legal standpoint. I would love having a women's team here. It would be incredible. There's obviously a ton of talent in this area
For
and
sure.
interest in the sport. I mean, this is one of the greatest soccer cities I've ever lived in, just from a standpoint of being a fan, being a recently unretired adult rec league player.
There you go. Good for you.
And and getting involved with Icarus and all of that stuff. I mean, Diodora is headquartered at Bach Building a couple blocks from me.
Oh, I
um,
didn't realize that.
their
Really?
US offices
Okay.
are here. Yeah.
Very
Shout
cool.
out to the Italians.
Still,
Keeping it
yeah,
in
still
South
kicking.
Philly.
Still
I
kicking.
see Serie A jerseys all over South Philly. It's hilarious, like very on brand. Um, so this is an incredible soccer city, and I'm so excited it's a host city for 2026. It's
I
gonna be
know. That's gonna be
um,
massive. That's gonna be
it's gonna be
massive.
great. And then
Yeah.
we've got the Unity Cup here, which is Philly's own sort of version of the World Cup. They have a men's
Hmm.
tournament, which I think last year and this year the group stage had 48 different countries playing in it,
Yeah. It's amazing what they did. Huge draw. And I think
which
it's
is
been like what
crazy. And
five,
it's
six
put
years
on
now.
by
Yeah.
the Parks and Rec department, and they're
Yeah.
getting a women's version off the ground and just
Oh, awesome.
the
Awesome.
yeah. So it's people love the sport here, and it's not only an MLS city. You get all kinds of people and all kinds of interests, and there are a ton of colleges here too, so you get that scene as well. So it's a pretty good place for me to for me to end up, for somewhere that doesn't have a team playing actually in the city downtown, close to where I am, but also not having a women's team. I'm pretty happy here as a fan, despite those two things.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's been, growing up in this area, always producing very good players on the men
Yeah.
and the women's side. I would love to see a women's club in the area that could have an academy to be able to develop
Hmm.
players through, like the union has been able to
Yeah.
do from, and we now see the stories with, Brendan Aronson and
Yeah.
now Paxton Aronson, just like what the union have done. And like, there's absolutely that talent on the women's side too.
Yeah.
So really hoping that it would be great to see that pipeline, because being in the youth game, I know that there are definitely some really big clubs on the girls side, but
Hmm.
I think that having like the professional team as an option to
Yeah.
go through would really just help of just, all right, all the players are here, and just providing that pathway
Right.
would be really great to see. And then kind of, you said like when you're attending games, right, you feel like you're more of an observer, right? So I definitely have some questions about,
Hmm.
some of the differences. I even have questions about like the pre-match experience getting to and into the
Yeah.
stadium, right? So for the
Yeah.
United States, we're such a car-centric country, right? So you're getting in the car. How much is parking going to be? How long are we going to sit in the parking lot for? You know, so what are some of like the more notable or interesting commutes to the stadiums that you can recall?
Um, a lot of metro rides. Um, One that sticks out was I was in Milan, headed to the San Siro to watch an AC Milan game, and I assumed everyone was like on their way home from work because they were also well dressed. But no, they were going to the game. There was so much leather. There were so many leather products. Everyone looked
Wow.
so good. I was like, I am underdressed for this sporting event. Um,
So best dressed goes to Milan.
Stress
Makes sense. Makes
goes to
sense. It doesn't
Milan
matter where they
for
are. They're
sure.
gonna. Yeah.
I like to walk to stadiums if possible. So I'll try to pick my lodging in an area where that's at least an option because, late night trains aren't always running necessarily. I now as a woman and someone who's usually traveling alone, there are a lot of different considerations that go into my game day experience down to
Hmm.
what I'm wearing. Am I wearing makeup? Can I run away from someone in my shoes? It's you're constantly worried for your own safety, and that extends to sort of the public transit and how you're getting there. So it's always a judgment call. I don't drink during these times. I stay totally sober so that I have all of my wits about me. Make
Hmm.
sure I'm paying for cell service internationally just in case anything happens. But generally, I'll take the train. I've taken some buses. And I like to walk. I'm trying to think if I've ever taken a boat to a game. I don't.
Planes, trains, automobiles,
I
right?
don't think I have. I was on a shuttle. My most memorable. Well, there were two. One funny and one like less funny. The less funny one, I was on my way home from an Aston Villa game in Birmingham, and I was the only woman in the train car.
Mm.
And it was like after the game, and you can't drink at your seat at stadiums in England, but people drink before and at halftime and after. And someone asked me if I was alone, and being asked that
Like, yeah, it's
a
not a
train car full
question.
of
Is
men,
that
and
your
then
only
like
thing you got? Yeah.
having to get home from the train station was terrifying, to be completely honest. A funnier story, which is also sad in its own way. I was on a shuttle bus in Kaliningrad, Russia, from the city center to the stadium for the Serbia-Switzerland game. And I was on a bus full of Swiss people. And again, I was a woman traveling alone. There may have been one or two other women on the bus, but this group of probably 50-year-old Swiss men were sort of chatting to me and like, oh, you're an American, cool. Da da da. A couple minutes go by and one of them comes over to me. And he's like, oh, so like you're actually a spy, right? And I was like, what? And he was like, you work in
American.
intelligence.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay. And there were like some rumors of nuclear warheads in Kaliningrad at the time. So I was like, okay, I mean, I saw something in the headlines about it. I don't know. And he goes, he said to me, there's no other reason for an American woman to be going to a World Cup game in Russia. And I was like, okay, dude, like, have a good game. See you later.
Yeah. Like you're on the
So
list now. Yeah.
well, yeah, I know I should have. You're getting detained. But it's a lot of that. My commute to a game is a lot of being asked or being sort of looked at, and people trying to figure out if I'm by myself. And then the commute out of a stadium is me trying to make sure no one's following me.
Yeah, again, differences. I mean, I was at Parc des Princes for the Champions League
Mm-hmm.
match in February, is like PSG Bayern, and
Uh-huh.
obviously going and there's going to be considerations because you're in the city. There's just a lot of people around. Yes, there's alcohol involved. It's like you don't know if things are going to pop up. They have the stadiums like pretty much, I don't know, 2 block radius is all
Mm-hmm.
shut up. You can only get in with a ticket and things. So like
Yeah.
even for the at the best of times, again, this is the dark side of like the game that we love, is that it has that pull on people, but it also just creates this environment for just being too much,
Yeah.
and so I think that's the challenge. What do you think is something you would take from something you've seen, let's say, regardless whether it's the US or abroad? We talked about kind of like the demographics and just the overall
Mm-hmm.
feeling, but like from maybe a design standpoint, the way that you line up for ticketing queue? Like, what would you wish, like, this one thing every stadium should have to make it like the best game day or match day experience?
Okay. Germany probably has the best game day experiences for a lot of reasons. Some of the worst things I've experienced are, I mean, in Italy, I had to like give my passport number when I was buying. They
Wow.
want to know where, and they know where everyone is, and they know who's in what seat and where. And I'm like, man, so in my brain, I'm just like, what happened here? Like,
Yeah.
that made it like this. Like, this is insane. And they're checking at every, so they're like, there are gates between the sections. You can't do a 360 around the stadium.
Mm-hmm.
You're in your section and they know who is in there if anything pops off. Another way to tell how lit a stadium has gotten in the past is if there are toilet seats in the women's room, or if they've been removed so that they can't be used as, a weapon or a projectile.
Yeah.
Which is pretty funny.
Inconvenient.
Yeah. Germany is the best game day experience I have had. There are a few reasons. One being regional public transit is included in the price of your ticket.
Fantastic.
You just like show it. It's got the logo. So it would have like the SEPTA logo on a ticket here. You just show it to the train steward and you get free transit all day. You can have beer at your seat there, and it's good local beer. A few of the stadiums I've been to, you'd pay €4.50 for a beer. So let's say that's like $6, $6.50. If you return your cup, you get €1 or €2 back. So at the end of the game, you've had like 4 or 5 beers and you spent like $8, $16, $20, and the stadium is spotless. There's no trash anywhere.
That's a brilliant idea. Yeah.
Yeah.
So
it's really not that hard. Like, it's pretty civilized.
Yep.
And the food, so that's definitely from a like, wow, they've got it figured out here.
Yeah.
Like, people not trashing a stadium. But I think part of it is that the ticket prices are low, so people don't feel entitled. Like, when you're an American and you've spent $300 to take a family of 4 to a sporting event,
it's like a mini vacation.
Don't feel like throwing away your trash.
Yeah.
Right. You leave it there for someone else to do. So it's just really a really different like understanding of what a match day experience can and should be there. And I haven't been everywhere, so I'm sure there are other equally as awesome places that really have it sort of nailed down. But yeah, it's different everywhere. Like I said, there are different safety checks in certain places. In Italy, I got a discounted ticket because I was a woman at a game, which I was not sure how to feel about. I still don't know how to feel about it. I was like,
was that like at the ticket? You like went to the ticket office?
Well, so I ordered it on. I had to fill out like this form and fax it. This was a Fiorentina game, and I didn't. They had these ticket categories, and one of them said like, it was like for older people and women, and I was like, well, okay, do they mean old women? So I just tried to, it's like, I'm just gonna pay the full price. And then when they sent it to me, they were like, oh, you checked the wrong category. Like, you're a woman, you get a discounted ticket. And I was like, who in the boardroom made this just like what? It was 33% less than a men's ticket for someone in my age bracket. It was so weird. I was unemployed at the time, so I was like, I
will take it.
Great to save the money,
but
just
like more spaghetti.
There are problems with this that people seem to think like, no, this is a great idea. Like, I don't know, man.
And is there, when you go to matches, is there like any souvenir or something like that you get, or like what's the one, a big one for soccer? You got the scarves, or obviously there's different flags and banners. Like, is there something you try to get as a little memento or token everywhere you go?
For a time, I would get if a U.S. player was on a team, I would get their jersey, even if they were just like getting garbage time minutes or not making match day squads. I would still get their name put on the jersey. This is going to sound really obnoxious and privileged because it is, but I really only buy jerseys in person now. With a few exceptions, like a U.S. national team, I'll have that so that I can wear it to a game. But that's how I keep my jersey collection down, is I only buy them at stadiums.
That's smart. That would help me.
Yeah,
so a closet full that I'm not going to touch.
Well, and it's I don't buy them everywhere either. It depends on like where I'm traveling and what. And so it takes a lot for me to buy a club team jersey, like I said, unless they have an American player, or if they have a women's player that I really like, I'll get their jersey. But I'm not like, I didn't buy a Barcelona jersey when I was there. I
Sure.
didn't buy a Real Madrid because I'm like, I don't need I don't, I'm not giving these teams my money outside of
Hmm.
my match day ticket.
Yeah.
But I will, there are some places, like I was in Argentina, I bought a Boca Juniors jersey because
Have to. Yeah.
obviously, and like I have a Flamengo jersey. So I sort of pick and choose. I got one when I was in Uruguay that I had to go to like a uniform store, like the places that sell like scrubs for nurses or like kids' school uniforms.
Okay.
I had to get, they were like, you have to go to this uniform
Like
like
straight from the
manufacturing
warehouse
store
supplier,
to buy a
basically.
Danubio
Yeah.
jersey. And I was like, okay, like I don't speak Spanish. I got it though. I got it. It's a great jersey. It's Edison Cavani's first club. Um, so
Awesome.
it's fun to try. Some places are like, we don't
Yeah.
sell jerseys at the
Yeah.
stadium. Like you have to go on this wild goose chase, and it makes for a great story. So it's always
Absolutely.
fun.
Awesome. Very cool. Yeah, well, I love that idea. It's definitely going to help me save a lot of money,
Yeah.
and add, a memory to the
Yeah, you end
experience,
up with
for
some
sure.
weird, like I have a Danny Williams Huddersfield Town jersey. So, gonna rock that someday.
There
If
you
you
go,
see
the
a
Terriers. Yep.
woman out in
Yep.
Philly wearing that, that's me.
Yeah. Awesome. There's not many people that can say that. He probably still
Exactly.
doesn't have
I know.
a Huddersfield kit. So awesome. So this has been great. I mean, I think hopefully our listeners are going to obviously be inspired to just go and explore more of the world,
Yeah.
and experience so many different faces and manifestations of this game that we love, and obviously talking about a lot of the issues that there are in the game, particularly on
Yeah.
the women's side, particularly on trying to be more inclusive culturally within stadiums, and sharing the game that so many people do love. And it's been fantastic. As we wrap up each podcast episode, Jessica, could you finish the sentence? Because football, dot, dot, dot.
Because football, I have been able to travel the world by myself.
Yep. And I can't think of many better reasons. So gotta love that. Awesome. Well, I have about 200 other questions for you.
Yeah, no
We could
worries.
probably do another 5 more. We didn't even touch on La Bombonera, which I'm like heartbroken about.
Yeah, that's okay.
There's so much. So, and I'm definitely going to be following up with you for travel tips
Great.
as I try to get more of these places on my itinerary. But really appreciate it. Really enjoyed this, and all your insight and the things that definitely got me thinking about a lot of things that I never really considered before when it comes to those experiences. So, for that, I
Yeah,
feel like
happy
I
to be
learned, and I
here.
appreciate that. Awesome.
Yeah, if anyone has
Great.
questions, they can reach out via Instagram.
Absolutely. Yep. We're going to have soccer sabbatical. If there's not a better handle on the gram, we'll have the links and everything to be able to get in touch. But thanks so much. And yeah, hopefully
Yeah.
we'll see you around Philly.